This week on the bench, we're going to tie you up a little Chironomid pattern that we call Dawn's number 1. It's my favorite because it is a black with a silver rib, has a few little modifications, and it seems to be the most prolific color, or most common color, at all the lakes we fish. Make sure you have these materials ready before you tie the fly. For the hook, we'll use a Mustad C47S size 10 curved Caddis, some 8/0 olive dun thread to tie with, some black stretch flex for the body, some silver ultra wire for the ribbing, a 7/64 silver bead for the bead, some Peacock Herl for the thorax, some white Ostrich Herl for the gills, some large holographic tinsel for the thorax cover, and some fluorescent green fabric paint for the slashes. To start the fly off, I've tied my thread onto the hook near the eyelet. We're going to take a strand of our white Ostrich Herl and just tie it in right at the head end. And then what I do is I'm going to just take about 2 or 3 wraps and then tie it off. And this will form the gills on the fly. Next step to the fly is to whip finish your thread behind the gills. Make sure you whip finish behind. And we're going to cut off our thread after we whip finish and then slide our bead up over the gills towards the eyelet. And when you slide it on, make sure that the thick end or the wide end of the bead goes on first so that it can cover the gills. After the bead's on the hook, I've put my thread back on and wound it down to the hook bend. I'm going to take a strand of our, or a length of our silver fine wire, tie it in at the rear of the hook, and this will be used to rib the fly a little bit later. Now the bead's on the hook, I've moved my thread back on and tied it to the hook bend. I've taken a length of my stretch flex and I've cut it into a small little V at the tail, or at the end here. I'm just going to catch it because we want to keep it thin, and then once I catch it onto the hook, I'm going to pull it back. I want to keep this very thin. Keep stretching it back as you tie it in. And then wrap your thread to about the halfway point in the hook. That's where our body's going to be tied to. Let's take the stretch flex and slowly wrap it forward. And as you're wrapping forward, again, Chironomid's thin body, keep pulling it and stretching it and keep that body nice and thin as you wrap up. And as you get a little further up, just slacken off on the stretching a bit just to give it a little bit thicker body, taper it up as we go. And again, stop about 3/5 of the way up your hook and tie it off. Let's take the ribbing that we've had off the back, the silver wire, and we're going to form usually about 5 to 6 ribs on the fly. And there's 5. And tie it off. Take a strand of your holographic tinsel, and what I like to do is put a small thorax cover on this fly. So I'm just going to tie it in just behind the bead, and we'll leave this off to tie over the thorax after, just to give it a little bit of sparkle. Now we're going to take 2 strands of our Peacock Herl and tie them in just behind the bead, and then we're going to rack them forward to form the thorax, and keep the thorax fairly small. We don't want it real bushy. So just a few wraps around, form the thorax, and finish off behind the bead. Once the thorax is tied in, we're going to take our holographic tinsel we had off the back and just pull it forward directly over the thorax and tie off behind the bead. Here's where the fly really changes up. This is a new addition to a fly, and I think it really enhances the fly. We're going to whip finish it, and then we're going to put our slashes on. So after you whip finish, behind the bead, cut off your thread, and then move the fly at an angle. Make it kind of flat. Flatten it right out, and just trim off some of that Peacock Herl along the side, on one side to start, because this is where the slash is going to go. Now that we have the fly on its side and we've trimmed off the Peacock Herl from the side, we're going to take some of our fluorescent green, and this is Tulip Slick. It's fabric paint, and I've got a bodkin, or a needle. Put a little bit on your needle, and you just need a small dab. And then we're just going to wipe this along onto the Peacock Herl and the bead. and just form a green slash on the fly on one side, and then turn the fly around and do exactly the same thing on the other side. So there it is, Don's #1 Chironomid. As you've noticed on the bench this season, we're tying a lot of my personal favorites, and of course I modify all my flies. One great modification again we made this year is adding this fluorescent paint to the flies. It makes them that much more effective. To watch all our latest Sport Fishing on the Fly episodes and to order Sport Fishing on the Fly merchandise, head to www.sfotf.ca. And if you would like to book an adventure like this one shown, head to ontheflyadventures.ca and book yourself the trip of a lifetime.